So idea number 6. It's on how, no, actually it's about growing mushrooms on logs. I'm talking about edible or medicinal mushrooms or functional foods, if you will. This is a business model or a business idea like any other ideas that I talked to you about before. Personally, I don't believe in this business model, but I thought that I'm going to explain you why, and I will kind of tell you what the profit is and all of that. But I don't believe because of 2 reasons. First, actually 3. First, you need to wait a lot of time. I'm talking about a year or 2 until your first flush. Secondly, you're growing mushrooms on logs, so if you really want a reliable profit, you need to grow mushrooms on a lot of logs. So this would mean for you to even cut the whole forest just to grow mushrooms on it, and I don't agree with that. Third, it's not a viable business model because of lower yields compared to when you would grow mushrooms indoors and you would offer those mushrooms the optimal conditions. In this case, you actually grow mushrooms outdoors, and you're dependent on the climate conditions from outside. So these are pretty much the reasons why I don't agree with this model. But in spite of this, there are a lot of people that want to grow mushrooms on logs, and some of them, they believe that they can grow mushrooms in order to supply local markets. Indeed, this is a more natural approach of growing mushrooms, like you would grow mushrooms in the woods, or you would just go there to collect them. Sounds like that. Okay, so let's dive into it. Mostly the mushrooms that you will see that people grow on logs are shiitake, reishi, turkey tail, hen of the woods or maitake, oyster mushrooms, lion's mane, and chicken of the woods. Very few people that I know of that grew ear mushrooms on logs. So mostly these are the mushroom species that you will see growing on logs. Now you can grow them on logs even in the backyard of your house or in a different location, or you can grow them on stumps. Let's say that you go in the woods, for example, and you inoculate some stumps, but you have to make sure that these stumps are fresh and they're not old and rotten or with some other mushrooms on them. You have to make sure that they're freshly cut stumps, and you have to analyze those stumps to make sure that it doesn't have any other competitor mushrooms on them, because otherwise it's going to be harder for your mushrooms to take over and so on. And one more thing about this, when you're growing mushrooms like this in the woods, you have to be very careful what kind of mushrooms do you grow and how they look like. Let's say that you would try to grow Flammulina velutipes, the wild version, which is it has a brownish, rusty brownish cap. So if you grow that, let's say, that's has a very close look-alike, which is Galerina marginata, which is poisonous and deadly poisonous. So you don't want to mistake the mushrooms. So you got to be careful on that. Make sure that the mushroom that you collect from that stump, it's the one that you planted in there. You can grow them on hardwoods or on softwoods. Hardwoods like oak, elm, beech, and so on. Pine, fir, poplar, aspen, and some other softwoods will give you mushrooms in less time than if you would grow them on hardwoods. In hardwoods, takes more time for the mushroom to break down the complex sugar into simple sugars. So, but what's interesting about that is the fact that you'll have more flushes and you can collect even more mushrooms than if you would grow them on softwoods. Okay, now let's look a little bit at the business potential of this idea. Now, I told you that it's going to provide you low yields. So if you're thinking about the yields in shiitake, let's say, first of all, in this case, you're going to wait 1 to 2 years until you're going to get your first flush. So this means that you have to prepare from now, and in like 2 years you're going to get your first flush, and then you can sell your mushrooms and supply local markets and all of that. Sounds like a long time, right? If you're going to grow shiitake on softwoods like pine or fir, you have to make sure that the pine or fir is aged first and then soaked, and then you can grow mushrooms on that kind of. But if you're just because pine and conifers in general, they inhibit mycelial growth, but shiitake is known to grow on conifer wood as well. Yeah, so you might get your first flush in less time, let's say 9 months, over 7 months, less than a year in general. But in the case of hardwoods, it's 1 to 2 years. Fruiting, so once it starts to fruit, this means that for like 4 up to 6 years you'll have mushrooms from time to time when the conditions are right. This means proper temperature and moisture mostly, because oxygen there will be plenty. So these two things, it's what you really need in that case. Now here's a paper published in 1982 on cultivating or growing shiitake on logs for the United States, and the author of this paper says that on 100 pounds of log you can get a range of 9 up to 35 pounds of shiitake, fresh shiitake, and that's going to give you a crop for 4 up to 6 years. Now, if you're taking an average of 20 pounds in 5 years as an average here, this means that you're going to get like 4 pounds of mushrooms per year of shiitake. Now, if you have 100 logs, each log weighing 100 pounds, you're going to get like 400 pounds of shiitake per year. Of course, if you want 4,000 pounds of shiitake per year, you will need 1,000 logs, each one of them weighing 100 pounds each. So this is what I'm telling you. You're going to have to cut the whole forest just to get 4,000 pounds of mushrooms per year, and that's depending on the climate conditions. It's not when you want them to pop, it's when the climate or the conditions or the universe wants them to pop. Compared to what would mean if you would grow these mushrooms indoors in optimal conditions. For shiitake, the yield, it's known to be a range between 50 and 100. Some people got 150 percent biological efficiency. So this means that if you're taking 100 pounds of dry substrate, you're going to get 100 pounds of mushrooms, and that's going to be in 2 months and a half about. So 100 pounds of mushrooms, let's say 2 to 3 months. Okay. Now what's that number compared to 4 pounds a year? So think about that. There are some differences in here, and this is viable. This is a viable business model, and that's why you have a lot of business of mushroom farms out there growing this way and not this way. Okay, so if you decide that you want to follow this model here, then the investment, you have to understand that it's quite low. You can actually start an idea like this with $100 in your pocket. If you live at the countryside or inside a city, but you definitely would need some kind of place, you know, where to put those logs and so on. Most of the amount that I'm exposing here, it's going to go for plug spawn, for wax, and logs eventually. But if you already have logs, you take that out and you're going to spend $100 for plug spawn and wax. Now plug spawn, probably you would need 100 plugs if you want to grow several kinds of mushrooms. You can start with 100 plugs or 200 plugs or 500 plugs for each one of the mushrooms that you want to grow, or you can go for like 1,000 plugs per species. That's for $45, let's say. That's an average. But instead of using plug spawn, I want to tell you, which is a little bit more expensive, you can use sawdust spawn or sawdust blocks, and you can use sawdust instead of plug spawn. That's going to be cheaper, and this means that you can purchase more for $100, and you'll need some wax because you need to make holes in your logs and then put your spawn in there, and then you have to seal it with wax. You can use some other things like silicone, but wax, it's more natural. So yeah, you can start that with $100 in your pocket, and I believe that you can put up at least 10 or 20 logs like that. Now, who's this suitable for? Well, what I see mostly is mushroom enthusiast people, like people that are passionate about growing mushrooms. They want to grow mushrooms on logs to see how it's done, and also to because of a more natural approach. Yeah, you can try it and see if it works for you. Now, there are some challenges. First of all, it's labor. imagine yourself taking the drilling machine and poking a lot of holes in one log, and then going to the other log and poking a bunch of holes to the other log. So it's labor. It's going to, you have to lift those logs, you have to roll them, you have to make holes in them. Every log, let's say you have a 1 foot log, you can put like 40 holes in those, because you need more inoculation points. More inoculation points means less colonization time. So yeah, think about that. Just try one log and see how much time does it take you to process that, and then you can try to figure out for like 100 logs how much time would it take you to do that. Time, we discussed that it's going to take up to 2 years, 1 year or 2 years for you to get your first flush. Competitors. Once you place that log outdoors, that's prompt to be taken over by some other mushrooms that would compete with your mushroom for the same food. So let's say that you'll have a Schizophyllum commune crawling in there and starting to take over your log. Well, guess what? Bad luck. Moisture loss. That's another challenge. You might lose moisture, especially during summer. So if you don't have a strategy to keep that log moist all the time, you'll have to go up there and wet that log from time to time. So it could be a little bit, you know, of effort. And I told you that the climate, it's climate dependent. So when the climate is optimal, then the mushrooms will pop. You don't have to worry about leaving your logs, your inoculated logs, over winter, because most mushrooms will be fine. So you don't have to worry about that. Even in freezing conditions, they will be fine. Okay, marketing. Well, once you'll have your first flush and you start to collect, then you can go to herb shops. If you decided that you want to grow reishi, turkey tail, maitake, shiitake, oysters, or lion's mane, or even chicken of the woods, all of these actually they have medicinal values. So you can powder them, you can take them to herb shops, or you can sell them dried to herb shops, or you can sell them fresh to restaurants, farmers market, or local markets. Success stories out there about this business model, I don't know. I don't know about any serious mushroom grower that grows mushrooms and has success with this business model and goes further with it. I know about random people starting to grow mushrooms on a bunch of logs and cutting a whole forest just to grow mushrooms on that. But I didn't hear about them, you know, making a lot of profit from it. So there are no real success stories about this. So what are the modules that I would recommend? Is the how-to module that you can take, and in that how-to module, how to make different things, how to grow different mushrooms or mushrooms that are harder to grow and so on, how to make shiitake snacks, and so that module, It's a kind of mixed module, and there you will find also on how to grow mushrooms on logs. So that's pretty much it about this model. I'm not going to tell you more about it, but if you really want to get into this idea, then feel free. And if you'll have a huge success with it, just let me know.